The night sky glittered above the city, stars hidden behind neon lights. On the top floor of a glass tower, a rooftop restaurant came alive with music, wealth, and laughter. Crystal chandeliers hung from open beams, their glow blending with the soft string of fairy lights draped across the terrace. A live jazz band played in the corner, saxophone notes floating into the warm evening air. Every table was a world of its own. Billionaires leaned back in velvet chairs, their diamond watches flashing under the lights. Celebrities clinked crystal glasses filled with rare wine. The air smelled of luxury, truffle dishes, aged whiskey, and fresh roses placed in tall vases. This was a room where power was displayed, not hidden. Amid all this brilliance moved the waiters, silent shadows in black uniforms. They carried silver trays high above their shoulders, weaving between tables with careful precision. To most of the guests, they were invisible, servants of the night, not worth a second glance. But one waiter stumbled. He wasn't careless, only exhausted. His tray wobbled as he tried to balance a bottle of wine and glasses. A sharp laugh erupted from a nearby table. A group of wealthy men turned toward him, eyes narrowing with cruel delight. "Careful, boy," one sneered, smirking at his companions. "Maybe you'd do better on stage than carrying drinks." Another chuckled, raising his glass. "Dance for us, go on, show us what you've got." Their words sliced through the air, drawing attention from the other tables. The mockery spread like fire. Laughter echoed across the rooftop, cruel and heavy, bouncing against the walls. Guests leaned in, eager for entertainment at someone else's expense. The young waiter froze. His hands trembled, tray rattling against his palm. His face flushed with humiliation. He looked around, the stares, the smirks, the whispers pressing against him like a weight. For a moment, it seemed he might drop everything and flee. But then he set the tray down. Slowly, carefully, he straightened, eyes fixed on the open space near the band. The crowd expected awkwardness, a clumsy joke, a desperate attempt to please. But as his foot lifted, his very first step into the dance, silence fell. And in that silence, one billionaire at the center table felt his throat tighten, his eyes burn. A man who hadn't cried in years suddenly couldn't hold back. The laughter that echoed across the rooftop wasn't born of joy. It was sharp, polished, dripping with superiority, the kind of laughter that separates those who hold power from those forced to serve it. The restaurant was more than a dining space. It was a stage for wealth. Every detail screamed exclusivity. Tables carved from Italian marble, chairs upholstered in deep burgundy velvet, bottles of wine priced higher than most men's annual salary. Even the air seemed to shimmer with entitlement. At the center table sat the billionaire, a man known not just for his empire, but for the way he carried himself, untouchable, unshaken, unreadable. His suit was tailored to perfection, his cufflinks pure gold. He spoke little, but his presence was enough to silence others. Around him, people tried to impress, laughing too loud at his rare jokes, leaning in close, hoping to catch his attention. They called him ruthless. To some, he was a genius, to others, a predator. Deals were won and lost by the curve of his lips, fortunes decided with a flick of his hand. Yet in this room, his word was law. And so, when he allowed the mockery of the waiter to continue, when he didn't stop the cruel dare, everyone else followed. They always did. The contrast was striking. On one side of the table sat the powerful, dressed in silk and diamonds, their fingers heavy with rings, their voices dripping with authority. On the other side moved the invisible ones, waiters in crisp uniforms, smiles forced, heads bowed low. The young waiter who had been singled out stood trembling. His black shoes, scuffed and worn, betrayed the truth. He belonged to a different world. A world of bills and bus rides, of late-night shifts and tired mornings. No one cared about that world here. Here, in this palace of glass and light, the poor were meant to fade into the background, to serve, to listen, to endure. One guest raised his glass and smirked. He's blushing, look at him, doesn't know whether to dance or run. The others chuckled. The cruel chorus grew, but beneath the noise, something deeper lingered, an expectation. Because in this room, power thrived on contrast. The mighty needed the weak to remind themselves of their strength. And yet, something in the billionaire's eyes shifted as the waiter placed his tray down. The man who had built walls around his emotions for years, who never let himself falter in public, found himself leaning forward, just slightly. He didn't know why, not yet. But soon he would. Behind the polished smiles he wore for the guests, the waiter carried a weight no one in that glittering rooftop could see. To the billionaires, he was just another nameless face, someone who refilled glasses and cleared plates. But away from the chandeliers, his life told a different story. His name was Daniel, 23 years old, too young to be this tired, too old to still be chasing childhood dreams. Every morning he rose before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because the world demanded it. Rent, bills, medicine for his mother, responsibility had stolen his youth. Daniel's family lived in a cramped apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were thin, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and yet he kept working to hold it all together. His younger sister studied late into the night by candlelight when the power bill couldn't be paid. His mother, once full of laughter, now lay weak from illness. Daniel carried them both on his shoulders quietly, without complaint. But deep inside, a flame still burned. Once long ago, Daniel had danced. He had fallen in love with it as a child, sneaking into community classes after school. Music transformed him. Where words failed, movement spoke. His teachers had seen raw talent in him, fluid, emotional, powerful. They believed he could have gone far. But dreams are fragile things. When his father left, the burden of survival crushed those dreams. Dance classes became a luxury he couldn't afford. Shoes with holes replaced ballet slippers. Stage lights turned into restaurant lamps. Instead of applause, he learned to accept tips and hurried thanks. Yet his body never forgot. Sometimes, late at night, when the city slept and the weight of the day pressed too heavy, Daniel would stand in the tiny apartment living room and let himself move again. Bare feet on cracked tiles, arms cutting through the dark. His little sister would clap softly, whispering, "One day, Danny, one day the world will see you." But the world never looked his way. And now, under the gaze of the wealthy, mocked for his clumsiness, dared to dance for their amusement. It felt like life's cruelest joke. To them, it was entertainment. To him, it was the very thing he had buried to survive. He wanted to disappear, yet somewhere deep inside the flame flickered, a whisper of the boy he once was. And in that rooftop moment, with laughter pressing against his ears, Daniel stood on the edge of two worlds, humiliation or a chance to remind himself he was more than a waiter. He just didn't know yet which one he would choose. The clinking of glasses had stopped. All eyes turned toward Daniel. The laughter still echoed, cruel and expectant, circling him like a trap. "Come on, waiter," one of the men said, leaning back in his chair, smug grin spreading across his face. "Show us a few moves, we could use some entertainment." Another chimed in, waving a jeweled hand dismissively. "Don't be shy, dance for your tips." The words burned, Daniel's throat tightened. His fingers clutched the tray until his knuckles turned white. His uniform suddenly felt too tight, his skin too exposed. The manager, standing at the far end of the room, shifted nervously but didn't intervene. No one dared challenge the billionaires. Their money kept the restaurant alive, and their arrogance ruled the night. Daniel glanced at the guests around him. Some smirked, eager for a show. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. A few whispered, their voices tinged with pity, "Poor kid, he's stuck." The band in the corner paused, their instruments silent, waiting to see what would happen. For a long moment, Daniel stood frozen. Humiliation burned through him, heavy and suffocating. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows and escape the mocking eyes. But then a memory surfaced. His old dance teacher, her voice gentle but firm. "Daniel, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving anyway, even when the world laughs." His chest rose with a shaky breath. Slowly, Daniel set the tray down on the nearest table. The glasses rattled softly against the silver, the sound cutting through the silence. He straightened his back, his shoulders no longer hunched. The laughter dimmed, curiosity replacing mockery. "Is he really going to do it?" someone whispered. Daniel's eyes swept across the room. For the first time, he wasn't looking down. His gaze held steady, even as his heart pounded so loud it felt like a drum in his chest. The billionaire at the center leaned forward, intrigued. He had seen many things in his life, deals worth billions, empires rise and fall, but he had never seen a waiter stare down a room filled with power. Daniel took a single step forward into the open space near the band. His shoes squeaked softly against the polished floor. The crowd leaned in, anticipation thick in the air. To them, it was still a joke. But to him, it was something else. A test, a moment, maybe his only one. And with that first step, everything began to change. Purpose, heightened emotion, and mystery. Summary: as the waiter dances, the billionaire is overwhelmed, fighting back tears. Memories flood in, of his late daughter who loved to dance the very same way. The waiter's feet moved with unexpected grace, gliding across the polished floor as if the tiles themselves had been waiting for him. The rhythm of the jazz band swelled, and with every step, the mocking smirks began to fade. But it was not the crowd's silence that carried the weight of the moment. It was the man seated at the center table. A billionaire. Silver hair brushed neatly back, a glass of red wine untouched before him, his reputation known in every corner of the city. To most, he was the definition of power. To some, he was untouchable. And yet, as the waiter moved, his eyes glistened. He leaned forward, his hand tightening around the edge of the tablecloth. The corners of his lips trembled. He tried to steady himself, but the weight of something unseen pressed down on him. Because this dance was not unfamiliar. Each twirl, each pause, each flourish of the waiter's hands in the air. It wasn't just a performance, it was a memory. For him, it was her. His daughter, the only child he had ever had. A girl who used to spin barefoot across their marble floors, laughing when she stumbled, glowing when she danced. A girl who believed the world was a stage and her joy was a gift to share. But she was gone, taken too soon. And now, before his very eyes, that same joy was reborn in the unlikeliest of places, in a trembling waiter who had been mocked only minutes before. Tears slipped free, rolling down his cheeks unnoticed. He didn't care that the entire restaurant could see him. He didn't care about his reputation or the image of strength he always wore like armor. All he saw was her, the way she once reached for his hands to guide him into her world of dance, the way she begged him to see not just money or success or business deals, but life, beauty, music. And he had been too busy, too distracted, always promising, "Next time, sweetheart, next time." Now there were no more next times. The waiter's final spin stopped directly before the billionaire's table. He hadn't planned it that way. It was as if fate itself had guided his steps. Their eyes met. The waiter breathing heavily, still trembling from the courage it took to move at all. And the billionaire, a man who had built empires, now broken down to tears by something as fragile and fleeting as a dance. A hush covered the restaurant. No one dared laugh anymore. No one dared whisper. Because in that moment, every soul present understood. This was not about a clumsy waiter. This was about grief, memory, and a man rediscovering the piece of his heart he thought he had buried forever. The billionaire raised a hand slowly, almost reverently, as if he were about to applaud. But instead, he placed it over his chest, his voice breaking as he whispered a name no one else in the room could hear. His daughter's name. And for the first time in years, he let himself cry, not as a billionaire, not as a figure of power, but as a father. The rooftop seemed to hold its breath. The laughter from moments before still echoed faintly, but it was quickly swallowed by silence. Every gaze in the glittering restaurant was fixed on the young waiter standing in the center of the floor. His tray, once trembling, now rested on a nearby table, his hands free, yet they shook in the soft glow of string lights. His heart pounded so loudly he was certain others could hear it. "What am I doing?" he thought. He had no training, no stage, no music meant for him. Only a dare and a room filled with eyes waiting for him to fail. But then he remembered. His mother's voice from years ago, gentle, tired, yet filled with warmth. "If the world laughs, let them laugh, my boy. Dance anyway, dance because it's yours." He closed his eyes. The jazz band played in the background, a mellow rhythm drifting through the air. The notes wrapped around him like an old friend. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his right foot slid across the floor. Not graceful, not perfect, just a step. The laughter began to fade. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses hovered in the air, forgotten. Then came the second step. This time his movement carried rhythm. His shoulders shifted, his body aligning with the music. A sway, a turn. His arms lifted slightly, flowing, not like a trained dancer, but like someone who carried the music deep in his veins. The rooftop lights shimmered on him. He no longer looked like a nervous waiter. He looked free. Gasps whispered around the room. The cruel smirks of the guests softened into disbelief. Even the arrogant man who had dared him leaned forward, his drink forgotten. But it was one guest, seated quietly near the corner, who reacted most differently. A billionaire, silver hair, sharp suit, eyes weary with the weight of 1,000 deals, froze in his chair. His lips parted and his chest tightened as though struck by a memory long buried. The waiter twirled clumsily yet beautifully, the way a child does when he dances with abandon. Each imperfect move carried honesty. Each step seemed to peel away the polished veneer of the night. The billionaire's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway. To the astonishment of those nearby, the richest man in the room, one known for being ruthless and unshakable, pressed a trembling hand to his face. No one could understand why, not yet. But for him, that first step was not just a waiter's act of courage. It was the echo of someone he had lost. Someone who once danced exactly like this, unguarded, alive, untamed. And as the waiter spun again, awkward yet luminous, the billionaire's silent tears became the most haunting sound of the night. The music paused for just a second, as if even the jazz band had sensed the tension in the air. Plates clinked softly, glasses chimed, but all eyes were on him, the waiter standing frozen, his tray trembling in his hands. A cruel voice cut through the silence. "Well, what are you waiting for? Dance." The laughter rippled again, sharp and mocking. His face flushed red, his throat dry. He looked toward the exit, toward the kitchen door where he could run and hide. But then his gaze landed on the stage. The violin sat there, untouched, glowing under the warm lights like a secret calling only to him. He set the tray down slowly, almost deliberately. The crowd leaned forward, expecting a stumble, a joke, an awkward shuffle to entertain them. And then he moved. Not a clumsy twitch, not a forced step, but a graceful, deliberate glide across the polished floor. His foot touched down like it had always belonged there, as though he wasn't a waiter but a performer taking center stage. The laughter faltered, the arrogant smirks froze. He lifted his arms, not with the stiffness of a servant but with the fluidity of a dancer. His shoulders relaxed, his posture shifted, and in that single moment he transformed. The mockery melted into confusion. Guests exchanged glances, whispering. The room that had been alive with noise only seconds before grew quieter, quieter, until only the faint hum of the city beyond the glass windows could be heard. He turned once, his movement precise and controlled, every gesture painted with elegance. There was no music from the band, yet it felt as if he carried his own symphony within him. A woman gasped softly. A man's glass stopped halfway to his lips. And then, from the corner table, the billionaire, the one whose gaze had been distant all night, leaned forward. His hand gripped the edge of the table, his eyes locked on the waiter as if seeing a ghost. With each step, the waiter's dance grew more powerful, his body telling a story that words never could. It was not just movement. It was pain, longing, hope, and freedom stitched together in rhythm. The billionaire's eyes shimmered, and before anyone could notice, a tear slipped down his cheek. Silence had claimed the entire rooftop. No one laughed anymore. No one moved. The city lights flickered outside, but inside, time had stopped, every soul captured by the unexpected beauty of a waiter who had been dared to humiliate himself, yet instead revealed something extraordinary. The waiter's first step had changed everything. And for one man in that room, it unlocked a memory buried so deep, it brought him to tears. The rooftop, moments ago a battlefield of humiliation and pride, now pulsed with a silence so profound it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The young waiter, chest rising and falling with exhaustion, face glistening with sweat, stood at the center of the room. His tray had long been set aside, his uniform damp, his shoes scuffed, but none of that mattered anymore. Every eye, once filled with ridicule, now shimmered with awe. And then came the sound. Not applause, not laughter, just a faint, choked sob from the corner table. The billionaire. His hand, usually clenched around a crystal glass of aged wine, now trembled. He reached up and removed his glasses, his eyes wet, his face pale. For a man whose empire spanned continents, who had everything the world could offer, it was strange to see him so fragile. People turned toward him, whispering. But he didn't care. He leaned forward, his voice hoarse, cracking the silence. Where did you learn that dance?" The waiter's breath hitched. His eyes darted between the crowd and the billionaire. He wasn't sure if this was another cruel trick, but the billionaire's expression wasn't mocking, it was pleading. The waiter swallowed. My mother taught me when I was a child. She said dance is how the heart speaks when words fail." The billionaire covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking. A few guests gasped, others leaned in. The waiter, trembling, added softly, "She passed away when I was 12. I kept dancing so I wouldn't forget her." The billionaire slowly lowered his hands. His eyes glistened with memories too heavy for words. And then, with a voice so low yet so raw, he said, "That was her dance." The waiter froze. "What?" The billionaire's lips quivered. "My wife. She used to dance like that, every night in our living room, before the cancer, before I lost her." The rooftop, filled with glittering chandeliers and the clinking of crystal moments earlier, now felt like a sacred hall of ghosts. Guests who once sneered now bowed their heads. Even the live jazz band sat frozen, their instruments forgotten. The waiter's eyes blurred with tears. "Your wife, she was my mother." The billionaire's breath caught. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the marble. The two stared at each other across the glittering tables, their lives, one of wealth and one of struggle, suddenly bound by the thread of memory. In the stillness, the truth echoed louder than any music. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was blood calling to blood. The billionaire took one slow step forward, and then another. His face, once hardened by years of power, melted into something tender, something lost, something found. The waiter's knees almost gave way. His tray, his uniform, his title as the clumsy boy no longer mattered. He wasn't just a waiter. He was the son of the woman the billionaire had loved. The crowd looked on, their breaths shallow, waiting for what would come next. The final note of the song floated into the night like a prayer released to the stars. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. The young waiter froze in place, chest heaving, sweat glistening on his brow, his hands still suspended in the air as if he were holding the last thread of a dream that refused to end. And then silence. Not the cruel silence of mockery, but a sacred stillness. A silence so deep it wrapped itself around every soul in the room. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The murmur of gossiping voices had died. Even the city below, its horns, its chaos, its heartbeat, felt distant, as if bowing in reverence to what had just unfolded. The waiter's eyes darted nervously. Had he done something wrong? His chest tightened. But then he saw them. The same people who had laughed at him, now frozen with mouths slightly parted, eyes wide with disbelief. Some had hands clasped before their lips. A few had tears streaking down faces once twisted in ridicule. At the farthest table, the billionaire who had dared him, his glass of wine still trembling in hand, was no longer smirking. His jaw quivered. His eyes, glossy with something raw, betrayed a storm that no amount of money could shield him from. And then, like a tide breaking against the shore, the applause erupted. It was not polite clapping. It was thunder. Palms crashing together with urgency, chairs scraping back as people rose to their feet. Some shouted, others whistled, others cried out as though they had witnessed something divine. The waiter stood stunned, his hands still trembling. He had braced himself for humiliation, for laughter, for being the punchline of their evening. But instead, he stood bathed in a storm of ovation that shook the very floor beneath his shoes. A woman in diamonds pressed her hands to her chest, whispering, That was beautiful." A young actor leaned forward with tears shining in his eyes, as if he had just seen himself reflected in the boy's bravery. The waiter's throat tightened, his lips parted but no words came. And then the billionaire rose, slowly, heavily, as though burdened by something invisible. His chair scraped loudly against the marble, every eye turned to him. He walked forward, his steps echoing in the hushed air, until he stood before the trembling waiter. For a second, the boy thought he would be mocked again. He braced himself. But instead, the billionaire's hand reached out, firm, steady. His voice cracked as he spoke, just loud enough for the room to hear. "You reminded me of someone I lost." The applause quieted, the air heavy with a new kind of silence. A silence not of judgment, but of connection. And in that fragile moment, under the glow of string lights and city stars, the waiter realized he had not only danced, he had awakened something in every soul present. The room would never be the same. The rooftop was no longer the same. The music had stopped long ago, yet no one seemed to notice. All eyes remained fixed on the young waiter, his chest still rising with the rhythm of a dance that had ended minutes ago, his body trembling, his tray forgotten on the floor. Silence lingered, heavy and sacred, until it was broken not by applause, but by the soft, unmistakable sound of someone crying. Heads turned. The billionaire, the one everyone feared, admired, envied, had his face buried in his hands. Tears streaked down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking. This was a man known for power, for ruthlessness, for deals that moved markets and shaped nations. But in this moment, he wasn't a titan. He was human, fragile, broken open by the dance of a boy who should have been invisible. The room froze. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, others whispered, but no one dared laugh anymore. What they had witnessed was no longer entertainment, it was revelation. The billionaire rose slowly, his napkin falling from his lap like a white flag. He walked toward the waiter, each step echoing louder than the jazz band ever had. The young man stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs. His mind raced. Had he embarrassed him? Would he be thrown out, fired, punished? But when the billionaire stopped in front of him, there was no anger in his eyes, only sorrow and gratitude. With a trembling voice, the billionaire whispered, "You dance like my daughter." The words struck the waiter like lightning. He blinked, not sure if he had heard right. The billionaire swallowed hard and continued, his voice breaking with every word. She loved to dance. Every night she would dance in our living room. Even when I came home late, tired, cold, she would wait for me. She would dance, hoping I would watch, and I never did. I told her I was busy. I told her the world didn't stop for dreams. He paused, his chest heaving as memories clawed their way back. The room listened in stunned silence. One night she begged me to watch her, just once. I told her I had a meeting, I told her tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. She died in an accident the next day. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The billionaire's voice cracked like glass. For years, I've lived with that regret. For years, I've hated the sound of music, hated the sight of dancing, because it reminded me of what I lost. And tonight, you moved exactly as she did. The way you turned, the way you lifted your arms, it was her. It was like she was here again, dancing through you. Tears rolled freely now, falling onto the marble floor. The billionaire reached out, placing his hand on the waiter's shoulder. "Thank you for giving me one last chance to see her." The waiter's throat tightened. He had no words, only tears. In that moment, the arrogance of the wealthy, the glitter of the city lights, the cruel laughter, all of it faded. What remained was a shared truth, that behind every suit, every fortune, every face, there was a story, a wound, a longing. The billionaire turned to the room, his voice suddenly commanding, but softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Shame on all of us," he said. "We mocked him, we dared him, we made his pain our amusement, yet his courage gave us a gift none of us deserved." Silence, heavy, shameful. Even the arrogant guests who had laughed the loudest now looked down at their plates, unable to meet his eyes. Then slowly something began to change. One by one, people stood, first in awkwardness, then in sincerity. They clapped, not the polite applause of a gala, not the shallow praise of an audience, but something raw, something real. They clapped for the boy who had carried courage in his trembling steps. They clapped for the reminder that humanity still lived beneath their jeweled gowns and polished shoes. The waiter stood stunned, his tears blurring the faces around him. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't the boy who dropped glasses or carried trays. He was seen. The billionaire embraced him, an embrace not of power but of humility. "Never stop dancing," he whispered. "The world needs it more than you know." And for the first time in years, the billionaire smiled. Not the smile of business deals or magazine covers, but the fragile, healing smile of a man who had remembered what it meant to be alive. As the guests left that night, something lingered in the air. Not just the glow of string lights or the scent of roses, but a truth too powerful to forget. That dignity can live in silence. That courage can rise from humiliation. And that sometimes, the smallest steps can shake the mightiest souls. The young waiter picked up his tray again. His uniform was still wrinkled, his shoes still scuffed, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't just serving tables anymore, he was carrying a story, a memory, a promise. And the billionaire, he walked into the night lighter than he had in years. He had wealth, power, influence, but for the first time he had something greater, peace. Because in the trembling steps of a boy he once would have ignored, he had seen his daughter dance again. Life isn't measured by the empires we build or the wealth we accumulate. It's measured in the moments we dare to see each other. That night, a waiter's first step silenced arrogance and made a billionaire cry. And perhaps in their tears, the world was reminded kindness, courage, and art still have the power to heal. The camera pans up from the rooftop, past the glowing city skyline to the night sky. The sound of soft footsteps fades into the distance, steps that once trembled but now carry the weight of a story that will never be forgotten.